We only have a few days to keep our promise and review it. Let's talk about Oculus.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, may you please let the people know what we're going to be discussing or debating about?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This is also the fourth and final week of our annual Halloween series, in which we go back to some of our favorite horror movies. We started in the 80s with The Fly and have now made our way into the 2010s with 2013's Oculus, which follows the story of a man who is released from psychiatric care after having killed his father 11 years earlier. And his sister welcomes him with a plan to prove that he did not, in fact, kill his father, but that a demonic mirror made him do it 11 years ago. And she has a plan for proving this to the world, to exonerate him and the father, who's accused of having killed the mother, and destroying the mirror in the process. So, what did we think of Oculus?
This was a surprise hit for me, to be honest. I kind of started off thinking, this doesn't look great. It looks a little bit budget or whatever. But very quickly, we kind of got into the story of, the brother and the sister. And there was this debate unfolding as to whether they were insane or whether what they actually experienced was actually real. And there was like this supernatural element coming from the mirror. I just kind of found myself really intrigued with that in the movie. And I feel like they played it off quite well in this. I think ultimately it seemed like that the demonic and the supernatural force was actually there. And it just kind of outsmarted them. And it was, a little bit too clever for them in the end. But I really liked that whole conflict, especially for the first half of the movie when the brother that was in the system, indoctrinated, he's been gone through all the different medical aspects of it. And then you've got a sister that's obsessed over it since they were kids and has carried that with her. And the minute her brothers got out, it's like the first thing that she's kind of dragged him into, and not this kind of welcome home meal or anything like that. She's kind of put him right back into the trauma that he experienced for the past however many years. The performances actually got better as the movie went along. At the start, it was quite shaky. I don't know whether it improved or whether I just kind of found myself settling into the movie and not caring. But there was one moment where, the sister was like, "Oh, hey, little brother," and I was like, that's it just didn't feel natural. It didn't feel like there was the chemistry there in terms of how she said it, how it was delivered, even just the choice of words and stuff like that. So the performance aspect of it started shaky, but I think I probably started to care a little bit less as we were sort of into the movie. And then kind of lastly, I think this movie really does tension and atmosphere really, really well. You're kind of on edge for the entirety of the movie because you know that the mirror is trying to, outsmart them, is trying to make them hallucinate situations and stuff like that. So you're always on edge, you're always questioning things, you're always second guessing what reality is in this movie, which is, which was really good. Even just some of the designs of the monsters and stuff like that. It's nothing out of this world, but it was effective for what the movie was. So overall, very positive on this, very, very, very solid entry into our Halloween movie reviews. And glad I watched it actually.
And Jonathan, had you seen this movie before, or was this your first watch?
I actually seen this before. I remember a long time, I think a few years back, you recommended me this. So watching it again, I didn't fully remember what actually had happened, but I had watched it before. And I think what did resonate with me and still resonates with me was how they used illusion in this movie. So overall, I enjoyed it. Overall, I did enjoy it. It felt like it was a story that had depth into it and different layers. Because a lot of the times when we watch horror movies, it's very simplistic and it's not. I wouldn't say generic because even though a mirror that's evil, I'm pretty sure that we've it's a generic idea, but just the way that it was executed was out of the ordinary, out from the norm. Yeah, I think just the way that illusion was used in this movie was definitely something which I thoroughly enjoyed, and yeah, it was especially with the ending as well. It's crazy, sad, and a lot of movies. I do understand that horror movies do end a lot of the times negative, but this one just felt a bit more damn, they took a risk with that ending because it's kind of depressing.
So I discovered this movie a couple of years ago, and I think it might be the only movie that kind of articulates my worldview, which is that if the supernatural did exist, It might not be measurable, it might not be scientifically explainable, but it would be real. It would have a real impact on the world, and you could observe this impact, and it would not simply be like in the shadows where it can never be found, or can never be detected, or can never be explained. And this is a story about somebody who is faced with this mystical, incomprehensible danger, and she's trying to make sense of it, and she's trying to outsmart it. Right? It's not being treated like just a weapon. It's being treated like an enemy, right? Like somebody that's actively trying to deceive you. A lot of movies have this problem where they kind of have these platitudes about the unexplainable, and I hate the phrase rational explanation, because if demon mirrors are real, then demon mirror is the rational explanation, right? And that is like one of those cliches that movies always go to. And this movie doesn't do that. It just outright says, okay, we have smart people who don't understand this thing, and they're trying to outsmart it and trying to survive it. What do they do? I think there's a different parts to it. And the first one is introducing the mirror and what it can do in its history, and setting up this trap for it, right? With all these precautions and the cameras and all of that. And then the second part is when the mirror starts messing with them and we start seeing more of their emotional history, right? So just to focus on the first part for a second, how did that come across to you?
It was a pleasant change to what you normally get in a horror movie, in terms of they were, one, immediately aware of what the danger was in the situation, kind of when we're, caught up with the characters, and two, that they were going after the evil, or she was like trying to like confront it and like outsmart it and capture it, and had all these different mechanisms and sort of safety measures in place. It just kind of added a different level of hook that most horror movies just don't have for me, in terms of you have like this enemy that you're now trying to beat, and like you said, that there's like different components of the movie which added a little bit more. Like we never really, to my knowledge, if I remember correctly, we never really know what the evil entity kind of really wants in this, but there's a lot of like explainers as to what it's able to do and like how far it's able to reach, and and like you said, like the effect on the real world, like the plants and the dogs and things like that were in this movie, and all of those elements of it just really worked to make for a more of a compelling story in this, in terms of making you root for the characters, because I think that's one thing that the whole movies failed to do as well, is make you root for the characters and actually make you sort of really care for the outcomes and like what's going to happen to these characters. And again, it kind of plays into as well this debate almost that they were having, where it was almost like medical science or like psychological science versus your real life experience, and like what you actually believe. It was just kind of like fascinating to hear. It was almost like the brother was just like regurgitating like stuff that he'd heard in the mental hospital that he'd been in like the past however many years, and he was just like explaining theory, or like applying theory to different things and stuff. And it was just, I don't know, it was quite fascinating. I kind of feel like I've forgotten your initial question that you asked, but I was kind of like rambling on. But just remind me of your initial question that you asked.
Well, just how that whole thing about introducing the mirror and introducing its powers and setting up this elaborate trap to kind of catch it and to kind of outsmart it.
Yeah, on that level, again, like Jonathan said, is that when you first introduced to it, it seems quite generic. It seems like, oh, it's just like another evil entity. And we saw it with The Conjuring as well this year that we watched, where it was just another evil mirror. The element of like trying to record it and trying to capture things and stuff like that, it just seemed logical and it seemed smart. And it's, again, you really believe the characters, you really believed that this is someone that has obsessed over it for however many years, has like gone through the lengths to try to track down this mirror, and has gone through the lengths of trying to remember from their childhood how this mirror behaved and how we can capture its effects so that we can prove that it's actually real. Because from what we saw at the start of the movie, people just don't believe it's real. Like, people don't believe in the supernatural in this particular world. So I would definitely say refreshing. It was like very interesting to have that perspective in a horror movie of we're going after the evil, especially in like the first movie, because I know some might do it in like the sequel where they're like kind of like flip the script on it, but having it in the first movie just again added something different to this, which was great.
And what I like about that entire thing is that both sides, so much of the first act is the debate between Kaylee and Tim, right? Because she's convinced the mirror is evil, and her brother and her father are innocent. And Tim has, through the last 11 years of therapy, come to accept that he did in fact kill his father, and that there was something wrong with him, and he's better now. And he is convinced that Kaylee needs help, that Kaylee also, like, that Kaylee did not get this help, right? And what I like about that entire thing is that, number one, nobody uses cliches in this. In a lesser movie, Kaylee would have a big speech about Tim being narrow-minded and the conspiracy of medicine, and any, you can fill in the blanks, right? Like, if you've seen movies like this. But also, Tim is not arrogant about it. He's not dismissive about it. And every argument he has makes sense. And that's true for both of them. Both of them make points that are totally justifiable from where they're standing, and based on their perception of things, and based on what they believe about the mirror. Because if Kaylee is correct, then Tim not recognizing its evil is dangerous, because that means it will go on killing. And if Tim is correct, then Kaylee is going down the rabbit hole that will probably destroy her. And if only she admitted that she needed some help, she would get it, and she would, like him, be better off for it, right? So within their perspectives, both of these completely make sense. And what's more, Tim is then convinced by the evidence, right? When he sees the mirror starting to do things. He only changes his mind when he has a good reason to. So I think that is something that really makes this movie, because at no point does anybody act like an idiot. At no point do people throw around cliches or platitudes or whatever. Everybody's acting in a pretty, like, with it, like, they're not perfectly rational automatons, right? But they're still people who are very emotional about this. But they are processing the information they get in a reasonable and understandable way. And I think the story is better off for it, because we kind of see both of their journeys as they have this debate and try to convince the other because they believe they are right. But they're basically antagonists to each other in the first act, right?
I think that's what kind of makes this film stand out. Is I don't recall a debate in a supernatural type of setting from any other film. And that was one, like I said, that was like the highlight. It was watching, what I wouldn't say it miraged a Christian versus atheist, but they were like, you could see why someone would kind of like, that would be the first thing someone thinks of when you see obviously what was going on between a brother and sister in this film. Like someone trying to push you to believe in the supernatural, but like an atheist, for example, against a Christian. For example, that's kind of like the feeling I was getting out, and this is how atheists and a Christian would act. Like an atheist would actually have to see the proof, and then once the brother was actually starting to see the proof, you're still in disbelief in a way and trying to kind of like still reason and find, like, you know what I'm saying, like just find any reasonable explanation. But then you started to, once it became inevitable, it became inevitable. So, but yeah, just the whole debate aspect of things I really enjoyed.
And the question is, at what point would you believe in the evil demon mirror? Right? And at what point is that more plausible than your sister just has like some trauma that broke her 11 years ago and she's trying to rationalize it, right? And the other thing is like it's not really about religion in this, right? But it's like believer versus non-believer. And almost no shows or movies do this well, and it's because we know what movie we're watching. The entire time we know that Tim is wrong. The entire time we know that this is a horror movie, and a lot has to happen before it's not the evil demon mirror. And that is kind of like the Scully problem. Like, if you've ever seen an episode of X-Files, you have like these two FBI agents investigate paranormal cases, and one of them doesn't believe, and the other believes. So clearly the non-believer has to be wrong every time, right? But why is she always the non-believer, right? Why doesn't she at some point just accept it, right? And the X-Files had some answers to that one, but it's like this classical problem of the non-believer has to be wrong in a horror movie or in a movie in which magic is real, right? And I think pulling off that conversion essentially in a way that is not tedious, that is not just a waste of time, that's not just a formality, I think is both important and really difficult. And I can't actually think of a movie that does it better than this one.
To be fair, I actually was questioning whether she was correct up until maybe like the halfway mark of the movie. Everything else kind of before that, especially like as the brother's like laying out his like explanations for things and his like reasons, and of course you kind of feel like eventually she's probably going to be right. But I was actually debating whether the movie would go down the route where actually she was crazy and like she was imagining things, and like it would turn out in the end that it was all in her mind, and like she'd brought her brother back into, you know, this environment where he'd experienced so much trauma, and like that put him like kind of reset all the progress he'd made in the mental institute as well. So I think the movie does a very effective job of convincing, like, you again, you kind of expect it to be right, but the movie does enough to like plant a seed of doubt of like, oh, it might not go that way. It might not be the typical way. And to be fair, the movie does subvert in some places, especially with the ending, which we'll probably talk on at some point in terms of sort of going a different direction. But I feel like in its debate, it did a really good job of keeping the audience guessing, even though we probably do anticipate which way the argument leads.
I think one way in which it does this is that it very carefully walks a fine line between the mirror being measurable and the mirror being just outright mysterious, where a lot of the early signs are just vague enough. Like, for instance, where the first time I think Kaylee sees the dog, right, where the mirror shows her old dog, and that could just be in her head, right? That it's ambiguous enough that this could be the movie telling us she's dwelling on that traumatic event from 11 years ago. As the movie goes on, there are like these increasingly or decreasingly vague signs, right, where it gets more and more specific. And in the beginning, Tim always has like an example, like a good explanation for it, right? Like the plants dying, or the dog being freaked out, or the temperature rising, right? Like in the beginning, his excuses are pretty reasonable. And it gets more and more overt and more drastic over time. And then I think the switch really flips when they both have been hypnotized and they see themselves doing things on the camera that they don't remember doing. And that's where I think that's the first really clear sign. And then it kind of escalates from there. Striking that balance is really difficult, where you could have just had like some science babble that shows, oh, look at this mirror, it's emitting this strange radiation that we can't explain, therefore it's magic. Or it's just outright mysterious and it just does random stuff for 2 hours, right? Like, I think both of those would have been possible, and the movie walking this fine line between those two extremes, I think, is why it works so well. So moving on to like the second act of this is when we start seeing flashbacks to the events from 11 years ago. They're not just flashbacks. Almost half of the runtime in the middle of the movie and like in the last 2 acts of the movie are flashbacks to the tragic events from 11 years ago, where the mirror got its hook into the parents, right? So how did you experience that? How did that work for you?
I liked seeing how the parents were deteriorating, which is a bit crazy to say, but they did it well. One thing I will say was the purpose of it. However, I think I'm just looking too much into it, because sometimes things like evil doesn't really need a reason. Evil is just evil. So that's kind of like the conclusion I came up with when it comes to like, okay, but why? Were they like chosen? Was they think they were just unlucky? So yeah, I was kind of looking for an answer to those questions. But the way that they were deteriorating, it came gradually. And I liked how, even though they were the brothers and sisters flashbacks, it felt like it was working along, like it was working with the mirror, if that makes sense. Like what we were seeing was triggered by the mirror, but at the same time, it was intentionally thought of by the brother and sister. That makes sense.
There were certainly parallels between them, right? Where it's kind of one narrative, but it switches between the two timelines, right? And one thing that I didn't quite pick up on my first view, or probably did, but one thing that really becomes apparent from the second one is how they get shorter, where initially you get fairly extended periods of time in each timeline. And then over time, we're jumping quicker between them. And then the mirror starts kind of blurring the lines, where Kaylee sees the dad walking through the hallway and things like that, right? Where the boundary between past and present is kind of blurring. And not only are we switching faster between them, they're kind of blending into each other until by the end they can't tell the difference.
That was great camera work. Those were like really good transitions actually between the sort of the younger selves and the older selves. And actually, I spoke about like chemistry at the very start of the movie. I actually thought like the chemistry between the younger kids in this movie was a lot better than what it was between the older two, or the like grown up version of brother and sister. Like I really kind of like bought into like their acting, their fear, and their sense of sort of like looking out for each other. To kind of go back to the kind of mirror and like its kind of possession over the family, it was great to see, because like again, you kind of don't want something that just immediately is like all powerful and like has like immediate control over them. It kind of like showed in the past and in the future as well why the mirror just didn't, as soon as they were like exposed to the radius of like the mirror circle, why the mirror just didn't immediately like trap them in this hallucination and like immediately get them like under its control. You kind of like see that the more exposure you have to it, like the more time you're like spending around this mirror, and like the more it's like getting its like claws into you, the more it's like getting into your psyche and getting under your skin. And like I feel like that's a much better view, or like a much better viewing experience, a much better transition, as opposed to like something where like it's just suddenly just has full control, or sometimes we kind of like see it in like other movies where in some of the movies like you might get like this like slow build up like of this big crescendo of like the horror or like the supernatural. It has like this like full control of like, the environment, and is putting out demons and stuff like that, or whatever. In like another horror movie, like they might go to the basement, for example, and then something's like in the background, they might like see it or whatever, like and then don't. But it's never really like, you never really understand why, when it gets to the point where like the evil entity is just like walking around the house, for example, like in The Conjuring, when like the guy with the axe is walking around the house, why at the start it's just a shadow, and then he's like fully in the house and fully like terrorizing the people in there. But here you could like feel the effects of the mirror like slowly taking over the psyche. You could feel the effects of the mirror like gaining more influence and gaining more control over the dad and the mum in his house. And you can kind of like see how it was like just like slowly manipulating them, and again, it just makes for a better viewing experience. And then they kind of explained it as well. I can't remember exactly what the line was about, how it needed to feed off of like the energy, or it needed to feed off of like something to like gain more power and gain more authority over its victims. For the grown-up versions of them, they were like exposed to that mirror for so long, so like it wasn't just feeding off the dog that they kind of fed to the mirror, but also like themselves, by being like in that room with the mirror for so long, that eventually it just had full control over their minds, to a point where you kind of get the ending that we got in that movie.
I think it's pretty clear that it has to feed on the energy and it has to wear you down, right? And that's why it has to start small, and that is why it has to gradually escalate. And I have a feeling if it just immediately went all out and you were seeing the apparitions and it was showing you your worst fears and all of that, then you would probably get scared and run away. It's kind of an exercise in frog boiling, right? Where it has to start off small and it has to gradually increase the pressure. And that is why initially, like the mom hears things like small slights against her appearance, right? Because the mirror knows exactly what will get to you, and its strategy is to slowly wear you down until you are at the point where you will just break down. And the final goal is for somebody to kill somebody else because of the stress they're under. And that is when I think that's the main cause, I think. And it's never fully explained, right? Like you said, there's like one or two lines where they kind of say vague things about how it works, but nobody really knows how it works. But I think it's clear that it has to push you slowly to the point where you will do something horrible. And that is when it wins.
That's the part where I like, where there's an explanation as to why it isn't at a 10 at the moment, at the start of the movie, compared to a haunted house where there's ghosts that you might just catch in the shadow, and then after a while like the ghosts fully come out, but there isn't really a reason why the escalation happened. That's kind of like a plus for the movie throughout, is that a lot of these things are just like really well thought out. There's like thought put behind some of the concepts and some of the ideas behind the evil entity in the house. It's not just an evil mirror, it's what kind of like radiation will like an evil mirror have, like how far is the influence of like this evil mirror, because like it's not something that I've heard discussed in like another horror movie before, like because what stops a haunted house spreading to the house next door? Like, why is it contained into like just these walls? It's not something I've ever questioned, but like this movie kind of makes me question it in other movies, in the sense of like, what is the actual radius of like the entity, like how far can it operate? Like, why can't it go outside? Why can't it affect them in like certain situations? There were like some things where I was like, probably wanted a little bit more explanation, like how it affected like technology and like the phone calls and stuff. Because I can see how it manipulates people, and it manipulates the people in the house to do what it wants it to do. Especially like with the scene when they put like the two cameras facing each other, and they come back into the room and see that the whole like phone thing and like interrupting like the frequencies and stuff like that. I can't remember if it was explained. I was questioning that a little bit of like, maybe like we kind of need to understand the full extent of its power. But yeah, like that whole element of just kind of slowly revealing its power, slowly like understanding it, like its influence, and just having some rules behind it, made it richer, I would say.
And they're not logical rules, but they're like patterns. One thing that always sticks out to me a little bit is this whole 10 meter, 30-foot radius. The fact that it's just a number rubs me a little bit the wrong way. where it seems like it should be something a little bit more nebulous than that, but it should be detectable, right? So one of the things that's pretty clear is that the one thing the mirror can do is it can mess with your perception, right? So that is like the purpose of all these alarm clocks and all of that. It can just make you forget to eat, and as a result, you will like that will weaken you. Or the phone calls, I think that's pretty clear that when Katie talks to the fiance, the voice she hears comes from the mirror because it's making her hear things and see things. And I think that is kind of its one trick, and that is how it has to work. You mentioned one thing, which is the way they're trying to fight it is not like with prayer or with like wishing or something like that. It's with trying to be smarter than it, right? Trying to understand its properties, trying to understand its tricks, and then trying to engineer a situation where it can't win, right? And I think that is really interesting because a lot of the time, like supernatural horror is not very friendly towards characters trying to be smart, but it's a bit like The Exorcist, right? Which one of the best religious horror movies made by an atheist. And that's because he just approached this as, what if this was real? He took it completely seriously, right? He had no personal stake in it at all. And this is a little bit similar here, where it's approaching a psychological and supernatural horror from a rationalist point of view, which is this thing can do things and there are limits to what it can do. So let's find those limits and then use that against it. I was once in Australia in a wildlife reserve where a zoologist was feeding a crocodile or an alligator, I forget which one it is. I think it's a crocodile. And he got so close to it, he could touch it. And he was completely safe because this crocodile behaves in not in scientific ways, but in predictable ways, where it will behave in certain ways and it can do certain things. And if you understand those ways, then you can be around it safely. And that is kind of what they're trying to do here. That, I think, is why it works. Another thing that makes it really work is it's a formidable, like they're formidable enemies towards each other, right? Kaylee's trying to outsmart it, and it's trying to outsmart Kaylee. And both the mirror and her do the best they can in order to get to their goal, right? And so when the mirror wins, it's all the more tragic because we saw Kaylee do everything right, and it still wasn't enough. And that is also often something you don't get in horror movies, where characters just do stupid things or they win or lose for no apparent reason other than it's time for the script to end or for time for the movie to end. And this one was like a logical extension of what both were trying to do and how they were trying to do it. It culminated in victory for the mirror, not because the movie was over and we need to end it, but because it wore Kelly down and maneuvered her to a point where it was understandable why she lost and why the brother lost as well.
Like there was something which I believe was the reason for kind of like her, I wouldn't say motivation, because she was always going to have motivation to find out why her parents did what they did. And well, her belief that, it was the mirror that caused her parents to do what they did. But I personally believe that belief came from her seeing her mother break the possession, because obviously during that scene where her mum was strangling her and then all of a sudden she snapped out of it, I think that moment for me was pivotal, because I think that kind of like explained to me, okay, I think this is where like I'm starting to understand now how she has so much confidence in taking on this mirror in the first place. Because I do get it, people will try and find answers when it comes to like traumatic stuff that happens in their past, even if it is supernatural. But a lot of the times they won't have the confidence to do it. You know what I'm saying? Or to have that certainty to do it. But I think because she saw her mother actually come out of the possession when she was strangling her, I think that was kind of like the confirmation for her that, okay, their parents was actually possessed and this wasn't actually them that was doing it.
I remember that differently. I remember them hugging, and that means like closure. Like that's her being reunited with her mother, and that's
No,
what the mirror.
I think you're remembering the wrong part. It's when they were kids, just before the mother gets shot by the father, where she's
I see.
strangling Kate on the floor, and then and then she like lets go, and then he shoots her.
I see. Okay, yeah, yeah. We were talking about different parts of the movie. Okay.
Katie actually saw that her mother had the power to break that possession. So I think that kind of gave her the confidence to actually go against this mirror and know that, okay, this mirror can be beaten. Because even though her mom did die, before she died, she showed that she beat the possession. You know what I'm saying? She snapped out of it. So
Yeah, but her plan is not to be possessed and then
no,
do that,
I'm
right?
not. Yeah,
Like,
no, I'm not insinuating her plan was that. I'm saying the confidence to number one, to expose the mirror's to expose the mirror's tricks and also to beat the mirror. It came from seeing her mum being able to break the possession as well. So I think that's where her confidence came from when it comes to beating the mirror.
See, I thought her resolve came from the desire to clear her brother's and her father's name. That the world
Yeah,
thinks they're murderers, and she wants to prove to the world that this is not true. And she spent the last 11 years gathering the evidence to do this.
my point was I don't know where like her confidence would even come from when it comes to like beating evil entities, especially if you're not like religious. So it's like for me, it was like I think that came from when she saw her mum actually beating the possession. So that's all my point was mainly was where her confidence came from to actually go against freaking demon or whatever that mirror was.
Yeah, but it's her life's work, right? Like she's decided this is the only thing I will ever do. This is the most important thing I could possibly do. I'm going to take my time and not gonna start the confrontation until I'm ready. And the movie starts when she thinks she's ready because she's worked on this for the past. It's not the whole 11 years, right? But from the minute she was 18 and she was on her own, that's when she started the plan. What do we think about the ending? Which is when the mirror keeps showing them flashbacks to the day their parents died, and it gets more and more intense, and the lines between reality blur more and more. And then the mirror lures Kaylee in front of the mirror by showing her an image of her mother trying to unite with her. And Tim is pushed so far that he decides he needs to end it, at which point he sets off the timer for the anchor, destroying the mirror, but Kaylee is standing in front of it, so he kills Kaylee. And then in the end, we have this parallel where we switch back and forth between the times when Tim is being arrested and is driven away in the police car, and he looks back at the house. And the first time Kaylee is there telling him she will find him and she will make it right. And then in the window, the mirror shows Tim the images of his dead parents. And then in the present, all three of them, the parents and Kaylee, are standing in the window, and the mirror is essentially showing off, saying, I beat you again, I beat you a second time, and this time they won't let you go again. And that's kind of as tragic as it gets, right? Not only is the truth not out, but Tim's life is over because now he will never get released, and Kaylee died, accomplishing nothing, and the memory of the parents is still as tarnished as it has been from the beginning. So failure all around, right? So did you enjoy that?
I think I finally understand the Hollywood ending, because that was a bit too much of a gut punch. That was a bit too that was a bit too much of a tragic and dark ending for my liking in this movie. Again, especially because the movie really does get you on board with wanting to beat this mirror after a certain point. And I think if I wasn't on board with them beating this mirror, I probably wouldn't have cared as much about the ending, and I thought it would have been like, okay, it's a good ending because it's a twist. But I was there on the ride, man. And to know that he'd just come out of the system, he finally overcame it mentally, his sister dragged him back into it, and he kind of really ended up back in the same situation that he was in, if not worse, because they're probably looking at it like we probably shouldn't have released him and probably should never release him after this point. It was just a bit too sad, man. I genuinely felt bad. I genuinely was like, is there another movie where I can see that it turns out actually all right for him in the end? But I mean, even like everything before that, like as you're saying, like as you know, things were getting like really intense. And that's kind of when we're starting to get like a little bit more of like the full picture of like, you know, how events played out when they were younger. But it's like kind of mixed in with them, you know, trying to go against the mirror in current day, and like the back and forth between it, the cuts, the transitions, everything just like really built up really well in that particular moment. You really felt like the desperation, you felt like the intensity of it, you felt the hurt of like the kids, and you felt like the fear, and you felt like the resolve as well that they showed in that situation to, you know, to try and come out of it. I don't know, like there was just like so many emotions in those scenes. And I feel like, yeah, the movie just really hit high at that point. And yeah, I don't know, it was I wouldn't even say it was a gut punch. It was like almost like a knife to the heart, because you could kind of see it happening, and like I was like really hoping that his sister wasn't there, or like his sister would like at the last minute like snap out of it and like move out the way. So it's like you're really hoping for it, and she doesn't, and she gets impaled, and it's a bit of a knife to the heart.
And then the mirror just has to rub it in, has to gloat. It's wonderful. It's a perfect ending. One of the best movie endings. I have the exact opposite reaction to this compared to you, because this is why the Hollywood ending stinks, because like stuff like this is much more memorable. Are you going to remember this ending, in 10 years, 5 years, or is it going to fade away like the happy endings of every Hollywood movie you've ever seen?
You're gonna remember it, and it is actually funny that like a lot of the stuff that I do remember and I do recommend to people, I do have like these kind of like tragic moments in it, or like tragic endings. I mean, some do have a happy ending at the end of it, but there often are these moments where it really grabs you emotionally, or it really like gets you emotionally, and you just like remember that feeling in the long term. So on that part, you're right, but in the present, it just hurt. It just hurt in the present.
See, I'm kind of glad I didn't see this in theaters, because I would just have been smiling throughout the entire ending. It's wonderful. It's exactly the ending the story needs. Like, they took the fight to the evil, and the evil won, because ultimately it's smarter than them. It's great, and they do everything right, and they still fail, and it's tragic, and it's awful, and we don't even hear somebody say, we will lock you away and throw away the key," or something like that, right? We just know what will come next for Tim, and that his suffering has just started, and that he will never get closure. He will never have a normal life after this, and he had a chance, and he threw it away because he cared about his sister. It's wonderful. It's a perfect ending for this movie. Other movies should have a happy ending, depending on the movie. But this is exactly the ending this story should have.
The feeling of awe was made worse as well because in a way, in both situations where the brother was sent to prison when he was young and when he was older, was because of his sister. One was by saving his sister, even though the dad was the one that pulled the trigger, but he did point the gun at the dad to save the sister. And obviously the second time was because of the sister, because he brought him back trying to solve obviously the mystery. And obviously, even though he saved her and he killed her at the same time, but it was because of his sisters. That's, I was like, damn, that's made it even worse. It's like the situation was mirrored in a way by an evil mirror. So that's kind of like, it was crazy. I was thinking, damn.
Yeah, but all she's ever wanted is to make things right. She's not doing this out of revenge. She's not doing this out of hate. She's doing this to save the reputation of her father and brother, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm
And
saying.
like
It wasn't
it's just
intentional.
it's just tragic all around. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that's the whole point. It wasn't intentional, but that's what happened at the end of the day. He was sent to prison in a way because of her, unintentionally. So it was like the whole mirroring because of an evil mirror, which mirrored the whole situation. It was crazy.
Yeah. So the one thing you guys might not be aware of is this is a remake, or it's a adaptation of a short film. Have you guys seen that? So there's a YouTube short film from like 2008 or something like that, a couple of years before this came out. And it's essentially, that scene where Kaylee records herself explaining what she's doing and showing all the evidence and showing all the contraptions she set up to trap the mirror. That's basically the short film. It's about 15 minutes long. And that was such a breakout hit that the rights for a movie adaptation were purchased by the studio, and they kind of expanded that idea into a feature-length film. So this is the Night Swim scenario, right? Remember that from a year and a half ago. So that started off with a YouTube short film that was really successful, and then the rights got acquired to turn this into a movie, and the movie was complete garbage because it didn't have a clear idea of what it wanted to do, and it didn't know how to expand the idea of a haunted pool into a full movie. And here the same thing happened like 10 years earlier, and here they do everything right? Like, this is very much in the spirit of the original. It takes this basic idea and simply expands on it without changing it too much, and it preserves the original intent, which was, we're trying to document and outsmart this supernatural evil with technology and with just intelligence, right? With just being systematic and trying to create controlled conditions and trying to trip it up and contain it and limit what it can do, so that it cannot it cannot kill us. And I think it's really interesting that this was done successfully, where somebody actually had an idea, because this whole tragic backstory of the family is not in the movie. Like in the original short film, that was kind of added to that. And you might think that just adding a tragic backstory and some family drama and all of that to this simple idea would break it, but actually that's what makes it work, right? That's why we care. We shouldn't just watch Kaylee set up experiments for 2 hours, right? That would be like, I would watch that, but I'm the only one, I think. Like, there would be not much point to that as a movie. But by making it personal and by adding this family into it, and we're seeing all of their failings, and we see this gradual progression of the mirror getting its hooks into their psyche, and pushing them and needling them with exactly what they need to hear to be pushed to the breaking point, and then we see them break, and it's tragic. I think that's exactly what, like, how you expand on that simple idea.
What's funny as well is that there are some some more similarities between Night Swim and this one. I think mainly between like the possessed father that you kind of see in Night Swim and that you see in this movie as well, and how it like slowly corrupts and like affects the family. And like you say, in Night Swim it didn't quite all the way work for sort of various different reasons. Whereas, and I feel like as well in Night Swim is that they got the law aspect of it wrong in terms of like the water and like, you know, the kind of like pool, that it was like the pool of water that was like the source of like the influence of like all the supernatural aspects of the movie. Whereas I feel like there isn't too much law in here, but like, you know, the explanation and the understanding of the evil entity really adds a lot to, you know, the viewing experience, as well as the tragic backstory, as well as like, you know, understanding how things played out for the family the first time round, and then that then feeding into, you know, the family the second time round. Especially as well, like in terms of like the backstory, because I kind of did think it was a bit harsh that they put the kid in prison for that, because they probably could have. There probably would have been enough evidence to not put the kid away for, you know, for however long, as long as they did, because, you know, you had
Well, it wasn't prison. It
not
wasn't
prison, but
prison.
like,
It was like psychiatric care. And at the end, he's released because he's cured, not because he served a sentence.
that is true. And it's still, like, I think it was hard to put him away for psychiatric care. But I guess if, you know, if you're a kid and you're trying to explain about evil mirrors and stuff like that as to why you killed someone, you probably do end up in a psychiatric ward, regardless of looking at the evidence or not. So actually thinking about it, it probably does make sense that he was locked up for that time, and not the sister, because he's the one that pulled the trigger on the father.
Like, another parallel this movie has is to Smile 2. Because in Smile 2, the story is mostly hallucination, right? And it's an evil entity manipulating the perception of the main character to get her to do certain things and to wear her down until she finally cracks. And that's the same thing that happens here, right?
This one was done a bit more, I think, like a bit more technical, if that's the right word to use, in terms of it felt like a detective story at that. Whereas the other one was all Smile, they weren't really trying to find the answers to what was like. Well, they were trying to find the answers to what was going on, but they were, in a way, they were trying to prove to themselves that they weren't going insane. So they actually, well, there is similarity. Sorry, there is similarity. I'm trying to look for the differences in terms of what makes one unique from the other, but it is pretty similar. I think the only difference is obviously with the whole debate between the brother and sister. One believing in obviously the supernatural, and the other not believing in the supernatural when it comes to the obviously that traumatic event. But yeah, it is very similar. I don't think. Well, there's a difference in terms of the storyline, but I don't think there's really much of a difference when it comes to obviously the whole, like, you know, illusions and the hallucinations.
I mean, they're very different stories, but what they have in common is that much of it happens in the heads of the characters,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Normally, a hallucination or a dream would be cheap, right? That would be bad storytelling a lot of the time, because it's not real, right? At some point, the character wakes up, and then everything we've seen and experienced up until this point is not real, right? Like in Smile 2, it's a little bit unclear what exactly is real and what isn't, and which of the characters' problems and challenges and struggles are actually real and which aren't. And the answer is they're all real, because they all have, like, she experiences all of them, and it informs what she does and what she thinks and what she feels, right? Because she experienced all of those things. And similarly, Kaylee and Tim here experience all of these things too, all these visions and all the illusions and all of the memories that the mirror brings back. They're all, like, the parents don't actually need to be there in order for their experience of their parents to have an impact on them, right? So I think that is like one of those areas where it can be not real within the story, but still real within the narrative, because the character experienced it and we see their reaction to having experienced it. Last time I had seen Oculus, I had not seen Smile 2. And this time I was reminded of that movie, like made 10 years later, that does a very similar thing in a quite similar way, and it works equally well in both cases, I thought.
It's funny you say that because I don't know why. I kind of, when I was thinking about it, thought of Inception. I don't know if you've watched Inception or not.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Even though like Inception's like completely different and Smile 2 is probably actually the better comparison to it. But to me it was, I don't know, I compared it to Conception just because of like not knowing like what reality is. And from the outside perspective, from the viewer perspective, we know like they're in a dream and if they're in a dream or not. But from a character perspective, especially the ones that they're trying to plant the Inception on, is that they don't know that they're dreaming, or like they don't know if like they're awake or not, or like where they're kind of at. And you kind of felt it with the characters here, where they're like kind of flirting between hallucinations and reality. But actually Smile 2 probably is the better comparison towards it, even though I actually think I prefer it the way that it was done in this particular movie. I think it was like, it made a lot more sense, and I think it was like a lot more understandable, and I think it was like a little bit, not, I wouldn't say easier to follow, but it was a little bit more logical, the way that you understood how it played out. Whereas I think in Smile 2, there's like a lot of like vague parts where you don't know like if it's real or it's not, even though it's like their experience and like it's been informed by it. But from a viewer perspective, it was like quite vague as to what actually really happened in that particular movie.
So you think the fact that we know exactly what's a hallucination by the end made it better for you?
I think so, yeah. I think because they're going up against the evil entity, and I think in Smile 2 as well, she's not kind of going up against it, she's kind of trying to survive it and trying to sort of get around it. But I feel like knowing what was hallucination, what wasn't, and like knowing like when they were like snapping in and out of it and stuff, made it better to follow, and it made it so that it was just like a better viewing experience in terms of, I don't know, I just felt like it made a little bit more sense, and I could easily follow it. And that's not to say that I don't like Smile 2. I actually really enjoyed Smile 2, and I really enjoyed how they played out the movie as well. But it just like being able to like follow it a little bit better here just kind of added to the viewing experience. And again, because you're on the ride with the characters, and because you're rooting for the characters you want them to win, you're hoping that they snap out of it. You're hoping that they kind of can see reality from non-reality in certain situations.
Yeah, I think one thing that really works for me is that by the end we pull the curtain back and we know exactly what's going on. That I think has an impact, where we know exactly that the mirror won and how it won and what the consequences for Tim are. And for Kaylee as well, like having been killed by Tim. The fact that we kind of put by the end of it, in the final shot, we put all the cards on the table, and the mirror is kind of showing its work, where we kind of know what it did and how it did it and how it got there. I think that makes it more impactful, in my opinion, as opposed to just confusing. And I think Smile 2 works really well on an emotional level, right? Where we're watching somebody have a complete breakdown. But here it's about, like, you tried to take the fight to this entity and you lost. And the movie shows you every step of the way how they lose, even though they put up the best possible attempt. So I do think that makes the impact higher, because ultimately, like when like I keep going back to the mirror gloating by showing Tim his dead family as he is driven away in the police car. But I do think that's really the exclamation mark at the end of the punchline, where knowing what's actually real and knowing what the outcome is for everybody involved, I think it makes the gut punch just a little bit harder.
The story just felt like there was a lot of pieces. Like I think you mentioned this before, it felt like a pattern, and a way it was a puzzle, which was slowly, kind of like forming into the finished piece. So then that was the finished piece, which was, wrongfully to say, was satisfying. Now we finally got the answer, even though the way that she did end. But yeah.
All right, to wrap this up, I think we all like this, right? Like, does this go on the shelf? Is this worth revisiting? Now that you know how it ends, is it worth rewatching? Is it worth recommending?
I think definitely one that goes in the shelf. I actually really like this one. I actually really like, of all the movies we've done in this particular series, I think I probably like this one the most, like by a long distance, even though I did like The Fly as well. I think there's probably a lot more that you can pick up on second viewing, and knowing the story and knowing how it plays out. And even like, kind of like revisiting like the argument that occurs in the first half of the movie, knowing how things play out probably just adds like, a different layer to the second viewing of it. So I would for sure at some point, if I kind of decide to like show the movie to someone, if they're like into horror movies, and I was like, oh, like here's a good one to watch, like I would definitely recommend this one.
And I do think it gains a lot from rewatching, because I do think all the pieces hold together. And once you kind of know, once you've experienced the mystery of what the mirror is going to do, and what all the visions mean, seeing those two things play out and the struggle in this battle of wills is really satisfying. And there's just lots of little details and lots of little lines that kind of show how much thought Kaylee put into this, and how she's seemingly thought of every possible angle and tried to cut off every line of attack for the mirror, and it still wasn't enough. And because she shows her work so thoroughly, it's really satisfying when she loses, which is maybe counterintuitive, but that's exactly my experience. Like, I just love watching the mirror kind of really flex its muscle and really show them who's boss. It's just so satisfying.
Yeah, for me, it wouldn't go on the shelf, but at the same time, it would be something which I would recommend to others, and something which I would from the want to be filmmaker in me, aspiring filmmaker in me, I would definitely use it more as a upskilling educational tool when it comes to what a good script looks like. You know what I'm saying? In terms of enjoyment, I enjoyed it, but I just think it was just one of them ones where it was like 2 times is enough for me. But I wouldn't mind watching it again with someone else, because I would be intrigued to see how the unraveling of the mystery, what effect it has on them.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, that this movie shows that having a smarter script is always better, even if you're making a horror movie, because it just works. Like, all the little cliches, like and there are a bunch of scenes in here, we didn't really touch on that, but I think there's a bunch of scenes and shots in here that are like out of a standard horror movie, but it's motivated by the characters and by how smart the script is and how much attention is paid to detail and all of that. And I think all of that elevates it. All right, shall we wrap it up?
Thank you very much for tuning into today's discussion. Like, for a very long time, it seems that we will be in agreement. We usually were at odds. Well, usually me against you two, but it feels nice. It feels nice.
You actually you actually missed last week where I did not like the recommendation that Daniel pulled, and that was, I think, one of the first times where I didn't like it.
Oh,
So
wow.
you missed that one.
Wow. Wow. I'm annoyed I missed
Yeah.
that one, but well, Hervé, please give us your. What'd you say?
I was gonna say we agreed to put it on the schedule every year until I like the movie, according to Daniel. So yeah,
Oh, fine. After what movie that was.
yeah, but yeah. If you reach this part of the episode, of course, we appreciate your support. We appreciate you working with us. As always, if you enjoyed our discussion and you liked what you heard today, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, I've got a movie for you to look into. We are the I Have Some podcast.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. We will catch you next time. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye bye.